Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Marie Newton, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be answering your questions at the end of the presentation, so please hold your questions until then, at which time you can submit them by clicking on the question icon. If you have further questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email them to me and I will forward them to the appropriate person that can answer them. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under Professional Development. And now I'd like to introduce Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel for CABE.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this very important webinar. The idea for this actually came out of a discussion that our board chairs had during their monthly check-in about 2 weeks ago, where they said they would really appreciate support and guidance in terms of responding to the rash of threats that we have seen throughout Connecticut and actually throughout the country as schools have opened. So what they were looking for were best practices in terms of what they can tell their community, as well as what they need to keep confidential, and also a refresher on the wonderful relationships that have been developed and these school security plans that are in place that are based on those relationships with local law enforcement and public safety officials. So we are very grateful to our extensive panel this morning who have put this together on very short notice. We very much appreciate your responsiveness, and I'm going to turn it over to our panel and let them run their program.
Great, thanks, Patrice. What I would like to do is to turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Brenda Bergeron first. She has a team here who will be joining us to present, and then we will turn it over to Attorney Floyd Dugas, and then I will wrap up the presentation. So I turn it over to you, Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of CABE for the opportunity for us to speak with you today. I'm Deputy Commissioner Brenda Bergeron, the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, responsible for the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Part of what we do, one of the things I love about our division is that we are both emergency management and Homeland Security. So also participating with us today is the Connecticut Intelligence Center, which is our Homeland Security piece. Tim Silva, the manager, you can see him with his flags and title. And I think that Bill Turley will be joining us as well, who is the lead on the emergency management side for school security. What I wanted to do today was just tell you a little bit about what we do here at DEMIS and how we interact with others. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tim to talk a little bit about, update you on where we are on the swatting incidents that have really been of concern across the country at this time. So we run the state school security grant program, which has focused on physical security since Public Act 13-3. So that's one of the big things that we do. We have given out over $88 million in physical security. We are just in conversations to try to enhance that legislation a little bit so that it could be used for things like planning and preparedness activities. That's at the very early stages, but that is something that we are trying to do. We also implement and update the school security plan standards. That's where Bill Turley and our attorney Kim Zigich really take the lead, working with our school security working group that convenes local and state partners every year to talk about what changes have been put in by the legislature or what changes we think we see as a group that could help to enhance school security. We also work with other agencies within the state and federal, including, of course, Anne-Marie Bernhardt and the Connecticut Center for School Safety on planning and training and exercises and crisis response, and assessments as well. So it really is I like the way that Patrice put it, but it really is a full community effort. I see that our Department of Education, John Frasinelli, who we work with on a virtually daily basis, is also on the call. So this is our team at the state level. But when it comes to something like swatting, I just want to say a couple of things about it before I turn it over to Tim. first is the general definition of it. So just so everybody understands on the call, it's when you make a prank call or you send a prank email or a text message threatening that violent action has occurred or will occur, and hoping to get an emergency response of some kind, whether it's law enforcement and other, to a particular location with no intent to commit the actual act. So it's an empty threat, but as we all know, municipal law enforcement, state law enforcement, education professionals at the municipal and state level all have to take it seriously. And as you all know, since the start of the school year, there's been a rash of these incidents, and Tim's going to talk about that a little bit more. One of the things we try to do at the Intelligence Center, and just to explain that, so on the Connecticut Intelligence Center side, we are made up of, we have intelligence analysts who are state employees, but we also have a network of local law enforcement connections who are known as regional intelligence liaison officers, who connect with the municipal intelligence liaison officers across the state. So we are a web of information, pulling it in, analyzing it, and getting it back out. We also are constantly connected with the FBI, with TSA, and other federal partners, as well as other state partners, including the state police, judicial department, and others. So in the picture that you see right now, and I'm going to embarrass him by saying this, you see George Bryce, who is one of the regional intelligence liaison officers who is constantly in contact with municipalities and pulling information in. One of the things we've been doing during the swatting time period is identifying trends, what types of swatting is taking place, and Tim can talk about that a little bit more. We also reach out to law enforcement to find out what they're seeing so that we can provide information to all law enforcement across the state, those who are seeing it and those that aren't, about what's taking place and how to address it. So we have the school security standards. We do the school security template, the plan template. We do the grant program, and on the emergency management side and CTIC side, we do the sort of analysis of what's taking place, and we get information from the feds and from locals and state agencies and pull it together so that we can further public safety across the state. So with that being said, I will tell you that I see that Bill Turley is on, and any questions that you have on the school security plan standards or the plan itself, or training and exercise in conjunction with Amory or otherwise, please, we will direct your questions to him, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim Silva to talk about the latest on what we've been seeing on the swatting side of things. Tim?
Can everybody hear us okay? So thank you for inviting us. The DC did a pretty good job of kind of explaining what we do and what we collect. So kind of our main focus is pulling in the different threats when they come in. And I'm going to have George kind of talk a little bit about some of the threat vectors when they come in. But our main focus, obviously, is when we get those threats in, is trying to catalog them so that we know what is new and what is not new. So if a school or any location gets some type of a threat and we've seen it before, we try to make sure all of those partners, law enforcement, some of our private sector partners, and the education in this particular instance, will know that, hey, we've seen this before. There were no threats associated with it. It's deemed to be non-credible, and then that would allow all of those partners to make decisions on how to react to that. Give them some feedback on whether it's new or not new. So that's like kind of what our main focus is. We pull those in. We try to find out when it's a new thing. We just saw this. If anybody else has seen it, let us know. And if it's not new, like, hey, we've seen this 3 or 4 times, so you should be aware of it so that you can make the appropriate response. Along those lines, Lieutenant George Bryce he's from the Fairfield County region of the state. He's going to talk about kind of an overall of the different threat vectors that we've seen.
Sure. So since the beginning of the school year, the primary mechanism that we've been dealing with has been school shooting threats via Snapchat. And those have taken a couple of different forms. One of the primary ones was older threats that had shown up previously last year or at other times in other locations have been screenshotted and then redistributed amongst students. So a student will get this picture of an old Snapchat threat and go, oh my God, I think they're talking about our school. they will then either inform a teacher or they'll send it to other students, and then it starts to circulate around, causing mass hysteria. And then when we get that information into us, we can look at that language and see that this was been seen somewhere else, and it's a duplication of a previous threat that was, deemed to be either a swatting or a hoax or something along those lines. There have been other school shooting threats, or I'll just say threats to life, that have shown up from students that are isolated to their location, saying something like, "I can't believe I got this teacher, I'm about to shoot up the school." Those have been quickly identified and isolated, and those students have been referred to juvenile court, where the juvenile court system is handling that. And then there have been other ones where through Snapchat, people have taken down lists of various schools. Some of those show up like in an alphabetical order list. Some of those school systems were ones that were receiving federal funding and for specific programs, and then they would produce this list and say, these schools are on our target list. And again, that particular one has been seen around the country, so we're able to quickly identify those as ones that have circulated somewhere else and are not necessarily specific to here in Connecticut. The other version that we've had with the bomb threat and swatting calls has been phone calls made into either law enforcement agencies or the schools where somebody claims that they have an AR-15 and they're outside of the school. Newtown dealt with this, I believe, a week or a week and a half ago. And it sounds like it's a kid on the line who says, "I'm outside of Holyville School, I have an AR-15 and I'm about to go in and shoot up the school." Those had been tracked back to an IP address out of the state of New York, and New York authorities have served a search warrant on that location. We're just waiting to find out what the results of that investigation were, but that's another variant that's happened. And then a more recent and different version has been threats made into the Veterans Crisis Hotline. So somebody is signing into the Veterans Crisis line, and in the chat, they say that they're going to go to a school, and they threaten schools in the Midwest as well as here in Connecticut, saying that they have a gun and they're going to go in. Those have been traced back to an IP address in Canada through a VPN service. So right now, the thing that we're looking to try to do is coordinate with some Canadian authorities to see if they're able to help us out with uncovering anything through those companies. But those are the general trends that we're seeing, is the traditional swatting going through anonymizing or VPN type services, and then kids redistributing Snapchat threats.
And thanks, George. And I know, this obviously, we saw a big rash of them, within the last 2 weeks, but, for everybody's awareness, they are still happening. I would say they're happening almost daily. We were dealing with one this morning. So it's still something that's still happening, still occurring, still prevalent, and, we are still tracking it. Thank you.
Thanks. And before I turn it back over to Cabe, is there anything you want to add, Bill Turley, before we move into the next speakers?
The only thing I would add is, and not sure if you mentioned it or not, we do provide a service at Demis, working with our regional offices, do safety and security assessments for schools. So that's another add, and we do a lot with AMRI's group as well, and AMRI's got a great behavioral threat assessment program.
Thanks, Bill. Turn it back to you. Thank you for the opportunity for us to present.
Great, and we really do appreciate you being with us today and all that you are doing to play your part in keeping our schools safe. So thank you. I'm going to next go to Amory and then John Frasinelli, and then we'll continue to move along. So Amory, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Amory Bernhardt, Director at the Connecticut Center for School Safety and Crisis Preparation at Western Connecticut State University. So we service the entire state. Outreach, we do professional development, and we do coordination and research too. So I'm just going to share my screen. I have a quick PowerPoint. I know time is limited here. Is that coming across now?
Yep, looks good.
Great. All right, thank you. So just a quick overview. We're looking at navigating school threats. We got a great intel from the Intel Center talking about what's happening. So I'm just going to cover some of the resources and some of the training available. So available resources, just so you know, there is this multi-page swatting emergency management procedures that we put together with our partners from the state, CTIC, Emergency Management, DESP, and it really helps us dive into a little more in depth of the prevention, the mitigation, response, and recovery from those incidents. Also, we had kind of synthesized it down after we did a panel discussion into a checklist. So we include things in here like the Intel Center, making sure that the school district gets their regular notifications, gets there for official use only, and also gets any, follows up with any kind of threat that the school does get, that they report it, and law enforcement agency reports it to the Intel Center. It's so important that they're able to keep track of that data. Here's another one we're just putting out. This is a preventing swatting and hoax threats deterrence. One of the things we realize is we are limited, and these are very problematic as we're going into this world. So if we could prevent them, that would be great. The best we could do to prevent. And so part of this is having those conversations with parents, with students, not only about the impact, but really diving into, there's a lot of consequences when these take place, such as physical harm, such as criminal and civil liability, there's discipline, loss of education time, there's psychological impact, and there's a lot of stats. They talked about, there was an article that just came out on the 30th. In that short 3.5-week period across the nation, over 700 students have been arrested for making threats. So again, this is super problematic. The cost to our school districts, 166 million they calculated last year, estimated on lost educational time. And then there's some other data. They did some estimates just on the law enforcement response alone, $100,000 of law enforcement resources all devoted towards these threats, which turn out to be hoax threats. So we're trying to make sure everybody's aware that these resources are out there to share with their school community. This guidance just came from CISA, from the Department of Homeland Security. Great toolkit. And the theme across all these different toolkits we're putting out there in the guidance, it's we need to appropriately respond, but we're really trying to avoid underreacting, but we also don't want to overreact to these threats. So available training. Part of the work we do here is we really try to work with our partners, Bill Turley, CTIC, all the other partners here from emergency management to try to put something together so we can basically assess the threat. This was a grant we got from the Department of Homeland Security, and it helps us to bring the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, or the CSTAG model. It's an evidence-based approach. Again, we're trying to avoid those overreactions, but we also don't want to underreact. So it's a systematic approach to threats when you know who the actor is. This is free of charge for all districts in the state of Connecticut. Again, that's thanks to a Department of Homeland Security grant we were awarded. We have a lot of training coming up. So we have, this is just the stuff I have in the next few months. So digital threat assessment, navigating social media, keeping track of those records, and also how to access and look for worrisome behavior, as well as some safety and mental health assessment with your threat assessment team. One of the other things we've seen is a lot of the teachers have been suffering from this, whether it be from perceptions of safety at school to professionals leaving the field altogether. So there's a seminar coming up on mental health among educators. The other work, we work hand in hand with the model from the National Association for School Psychologists, PREPARE. So you'll see our PREPARE Workshop 1 on here that's being offered on the 24th. And that really helps schools do that all-encompassing, comprehensive approach to school safety. And again, Bill Turley is going to be helping teaching that one on the 24th, and we have other instructors as well. Again, then we have advanced digital threat. We have the FBI is going to be running some training on the 14th, responding to investigating bomb threats and swatting hoax. That's the supervisory special agent, Brian LeBlanc, out of Boston. He's got a great 1 hour or so program on that. And then we have implementing CSTAG readiness in your district. Again, all geared towards helping people in school districts with program implementation of how threat awareness programs and behavioral assessments. And Friday, finally, we have Prepare Workshop 2. That is, again, another part of National Association of School Psychologists curriculum, and it helps focus on that acute traumatic stressor. We just had an incident that we were advising and consulting with the school district because they had an incident happen. There was a law enforcement response, and a lot of people were traumatized by it. So now we're trying to get them to help with their recovery and help them get back on base. And again, We don't want to over-respond, but we definitely want to under-respond and have people fall through the cracks of those incidents. That's a complete list of our training. I can put it in the chat as well. And then here is just my contact info if you needed it. I know I spoke quickly, but I know time is short. Great, thank you.
Emery, thank you so much. And you're right, time is short because there is just so much important information to cover on this topic. And we may need to do follow-up sessions on some of the various elements that we're talking about today. So Emery, thank you so very much for being with us and being such a valuable resource to the school communities across the state. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you John Frasinelli from the State Department of Education. John, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the partners for being part of this as well. Couple of things I just wanted to mention. School districts are required to submit school security and safety plans annually to the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. Those plans are due on November 1st. So information was provided to superintendents back in August, and so they should be working on those plans. A couple of things I want to mention of note in those plans. They are what we refer to as an all hazards plan. So it has everything to do with crisis drills, fire drills, lockdowns, covers everything from suspicious packages to suspicious persons to evacuation, shelter in place. All of that is included in that plan. So your districts do have an existing plan that is currently in place to cover all those things. We just ask that they be updated annually by November 1st. A couple of important things to note that are in those plans. There is something what we refer to as a mental health annex. As Amory mentioned, one of our big concerns at the State Department of Education is ensuring the social, emotional, mental well-being of our students and staff. And that annex provides standards on how to ensure that that occurs. These swatting events, even if determined not to be credible, the police, a swatting event that causes police to respond can be frightening for students and staff. As Amory mentioned, we had a recent event that we were able to coordinate with Amory's group and Child Mobile Crisis as well as Adult Mobile Crisis to provide some resources to come into the district to meet with the staff on an afternoon so that they could debrief the event, so that they could feel more comfortable about them, feel safe in the building. And so we are absolutely concerned with ensuring the emotional well-being of our students as well as our staff, and there are resources to support that if in fact it occurs. And we have teams of folks that will respond. One of the things I also wanted to mention is that this afternoon we have drafted a letter that was drafted by the governor's office, signed by the governor's office, and the Commissioner of Emergency Services and Public Protection, and the Commissioner of Education. Those are going out to superintendents actually this afternoon. And what those are ways in which families can support the work of trying to avoid some of these social media threats. As was mentioned, sometimes these are just cut and pastes of threats that are not credible or old, and it's not often something that they're trying to create a panic, but folks are trying to be helpful. They see something, they think it might impact their school, so they share it. So there are instructions on there on recommendations for families about monitoring their children's social media, monitoring their use of personal information on gaming platforms. That's often a doorway for folks to find out more. And monitoring the work the things that are happening online with their children and things like that. Also, the reassurance that those security and safety plans are being developed by the school, those are in place. There are whole teams of folks that participate in that. Local law enforcement is involved, community members are involved, first responders, school staff. And in this new this year for our school security and safety plans are the requirement that someone from the Department of Special Education in your district needs to be part of that plan. We want to make sure that the students who are most at risk and may need the most assistance in an emergency are covered, and there are plans in place to support them. We know this can be frightening to students, and any number of things, from just the alarm bells going off to sheltering in place can frighten students. We want to make sure that those parents are talked to and that those students are talked to, and so that everybody's aware of how to support those students emotionally, as well as physically safety in that regard. So, and again, so thank you for this opportunity, and we appreciate you chiming in.
Great. Thank you so very much, John. We appreciate your time in coordinating all these efforts. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Floyd Dugas.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to the prior presenters. A lot of good information there. Hopefully some of the data, including Amory's stuff, can be circulated, because it looked like some helpful, valuable information there. From the perspective of a school board attorney, there are a number of issues that pop up in my mind when I think about this. One of which, dealing with educators, of course, is the educational component around this, which I think is extremely important. Second is notification. I think Lisa was going to comment on that, so I'll just touch on that briefly. The student discipline implications, and also wanted to remind folks of the FERPA obligation. So in terms of the education, I don't know exactly what is happening statewide, but certainly I think a critical piece here is sharing with individuals, particularly the middle school level, where we know we hear brains aren't fully developed yet and they can be impulsive, but making it clear to folks through posters and other methods of notification that conduct that we're talking about here is criminal conduct and can have very serious consequences, that there's potential civil liability, and talking about the ramifications both to law enforcement in responding, as well as to their peers, teachers and staff, as has been discussed. So I think the education piece is a very important point, and hopefully that helps people to understand it's not a joke, and that there are serious consequences as a result. Where the school attorneys obviously get involved too is from, the question from superintendents, notification. When do we tell the parents, the community, what do we do? Again, I'm just going to touch on that briefly because I think Lisa's going to touch on it. But, obviously the concern here is not getting an overreaction, providing information before you know what's going on. But of course, if it's spread around the school to the kids and they go home to the parents are going to want to know, why didn't you tell us? And that's always a difficult balance to make. I would say that the key there is first determine it's not a credible threat. Hopefully it's not, as in most cases. And then at that point, the communication is just the facts. We received a report. We contacted law enforcement immediately. Law enforcement determined it was not a credible threat. We are satisfied that there wasn't a credible threat, and everybody is safe. That's generally the messaging that parents want to hear and superintendents want to get out. The other issue, of course, that comes up is student discipline. And for the next couple of comments, I'm going to assume that we're talking about somebody who is a student in the schools or is connected with the schools. Obviously, one of the things we will ultimately look at, one of the consequences in addition to criminal prosecution and potential civil liability, is discipline, and in this case, potentially serious discipline. And what I would say in that regard, so much of what we deal with the internet and social media and things of that nature, these things are coming at us before policy and laws can catch up with them. And in this regard, I would certainly say it's a good idea to take a look at your student discipline policies, particularly your codes of conduct, and make sure that they would appropriately cover calling it a prank or you know, a fake bomb threat or threatening to shoot up the school and those kinds of things. The other thing is I would just remind folks that, you know, in these situations, notwithstanding the need to react quickly, we are governed by FERPA. That comes into play in a number of respects. So the first one is obviously if there's a report within the school that identifies a student, that is FERPA protected, which means that only those people who absolutely have a right to know are given access to that record. It shouldn't be floating around the school that it was little Johnny Jones, who's always getting blamed and accused in these scenarios, hypotheticals, but that he was the one involved, and it really should be contained. There may be requests by the media for videos, it could be for incident reports, even student records, if the child's name gets out there through other sources. And just remember that it's like any other student record, they should be protected. We should obey the process. If it's video, there may be circumstances in which portions of it may be disclosed if there's a FOIA request. So folks should certainly contact their school attorney and look at any of those requests very carefully. The other piece that comes into play is the law enforcement piece. If there is an emerging threat, there's an exception in FERPA for law enforcement's access to student records, and that is permissible. But it is not an existing emerging threat, and we're now trying to find out who did it, or to assist law enforcement with possible criminal prosecution. Remember, once the threat is no longer imminent, then that exception to FERPA doesn't apply, and we would have to have search warrants and things of that nature in order to provide access, as much as we want to cooperate with law enforcement in these situations. So from a school attorney perspective, those are the immediate thoughts that come into play in dealing with these situations, Lisa.
Great. Thank you so very much, Floyd. Really appreciate your insights on this, because there are a number of considerations with legal implications, and it's a great segue into the communications piece, because that plays into it quite a bit. Will Marie, I'd like to share my screen if possible.
Okay, Lisa, I've made you a presenter.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So the communications piece of this, I'd like to talk a little bit about it, and I do have to give credit to our communications consultant that we work with, Chris Horan, for putting this together. He was originally scheduled to present this, and due to a family matter, he was unable to today, but he very graciously shared his slides with me. So I'm happy to be sharing this with you all. So as we all know, it's important to communicate with students, families, and staff, as well as the community, about the threats against schools. Our first obligation being to students, families, and staff. But it's important to include residents, especially those who abut school properties, to keep them informed as well. They need to hear what's going on, what the district is doing relative to a particular threat, and especially if there's additional police presence around the schools. So roles and responsibilities. Board members and superintendents hear us talk about this all the time, and staying in your lane. The superintendent and administrative team are responsible for all communication about threats and safety responses, including media appearances. The superintendent should keep the Board of Education members informed, and keeping in mind what Floyd just shared with us, there are going to be things that are not appropriate to be shared because of FERPA or, police investigations, that sort of thing. But you do need, as board members, to have the latest information that you are able to share. In the event you are asked in the frozen food aisle at your local grocery store by a community member, but so that you can respond. But you should not be the ones who are out in front of this communication about safety or, frankly, any other operational matters. So before any threats are received, the superintendent may consider sending a district-wide letter that, in the current climate we're in, that acknowledges that there has been an increase in school threats across the country and affirms the district's commitment to taking all threats seriously, emphasizes the district's strong partnership with the police, states that decisions about action steps will be made based on the credibility of any threat, and encourages vigilance and reporting anything suspicious. Don't wait until receiving a threat to communicate with constituents. And I know a number of school districts have implemented ways to report incidents anonymously, but publicize broadly how this information can be shared. It's this see something, say something, whether it be through your website, email, social media, posters. One district has created customized stickers with a QR code here that will take students to a reporting form. And this was given to all middle and high school students to, so they have the sticker on their laptops or their lockers or wherever they want. And if and when a threat is received and the police district have made a decision about how to proceed, as Floyd said, this is all balancing sharing information and not creating an overreaction. Craft a message to disseminate to family, staff, and the community. In most cases, send it to all schools, not just the one that the threat was brought against. If a school day or school activities are canceled because of the threat, begin with that. And if you are proceeding as usual, emphasize and make it very clear that the district and police have investigated the threat and determined that it is not credible. And share any precautionary steps that are being taken that you can share, whether it be additional police presence, enhanced screening, limited entry points, any counseling or other services that will be available for students and adults who need support because of the threat. This is something that's very upsetting to the students and adults alike. Again, going back to a few slides ago, urge everyone to share information or share anything that is suspicious. And reiterate the district's commitment to student and staff safety. Again, protect the confidentiality of everyone involved. And I know that's hard because people want to know what's going on. And And there are things that you will not know because of confidentiality, and there are things that you cannot share because of confidentiality. Very key, always get the police to sign off on any message before it is sent so you don't interfere with any investigation. And a lot of this comes down to building relationships before these incidents happen and building that trust within your community, so that if something happens, there is that trust for folks to know that you are dealing with this in the way that is going to keep your community as safe as possible. So how do you deliver this message? What channels? You hear us talk about communication channels. Will the district use to deliver the message? So the answers are going to vary district to district based on how you typically communicate with your constituents, and it may depend on the situation. So if school activities are affected, you might need a more urgent message because of the timeliness. So maybe not relying on email. If there's less urgency and the goal is to diffuse the situation, phone calls might have an opposite effect. That may heighten people's anxiety. But what's so important is that you are as consistent as possible in how you message, and that your families, staff, students all know what to expect in advance. Again, this is going to vary district by district, and it's going to be dependent on how you normally communicate with your communities. And we know that this goes beyond this. Let's see. Floyd mentioned the media. And again, this is going to be something that is most often, if not always, your superintendent doing, but it's important that you have this awareness. The message that was sent to families and staff can often be repurposed as a joint statement from schools and the police for the press. And the superintendent and/or police chief may opt to conduct media interviews to provide reassurance, but not additional details beyond what's in the message. And a consideration here is the superintendent or police chief, are they effective on camera, or may it be more appropriate that they stick to a written statement? And you know that the media has been giving a lot of coverage to these swatting issues and will most likely continue to do so. So it's important that you're prepared. So should a follow-up message be sent? And only if there is something that the police are comfortable with sharing with families, staff, public, and those sorts of things might be the issue is resolved and a threat no longer exists, which is the best possible news, or the threat has become more credible and we need to take additional steps. And here's how we're going to do it within the realm of what can be shared, because you don't want the messaging to interfere with any investigations or, again, confidentiality. So that is what I have as far as the communications piece, and I'd love to stop sharing my screen. Wilmarie?
No problem. I will, let's see.
While Wilmarie is doing that, we'd love to open the floor for questions from our participants to the presenters who are still here. Okay. Well, Marie, do we have any questions as we're all joining in?
We do not have any questions at the moment. I
Okay.
do want to let everyone know that I will be sharing the slides as well as the recording with everyone who registered.
Great. We'll give it a minute then, Will Marie, to see if there are any follow-up questions.
Yes. Okay, so our first question is, how do we manage FERPA restrictions versus community rumors, internet texts that say a student is coming back to school?
That would be me. You know, obviously you can't communicate any information that would be personally identifiable about an individual. Generally speaking, you know, just general reassurances, vague reassurances are best, although not always satisfactory to the parent. So statements along the lines of, you know, we're satisfied that there's no existing threat. We've taken appropriate steps. We're not at liberty to discuss student matters. But, you know, it's really all about just assuring folks that their kids are safe. So that's really the best response, you know, a generalized comforting statement in those situations.
Okay, our next question is, how quickly should that first communication go out, knowing that students are contacting their parents during the school day?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I would say is balancing the as soon as possible, but making sure that you're providing facts, that you're not stirring the pot unnecessarily and causing concern that does not need to be there necessarily. So I know that's a non-answer, but that would be my advice.
And I would give the same answer, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel great, Floyd. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not, you know, it's hard to give you a one size fits all, but obviously at some point when you know parents are made aware and there's a buzz, you need to respond pretty quickly. But, you know, you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't say, we know it's not a credible threat before that's been determined. But, you know, as soon as you can communicate that particular message, I think that's extremely important.
And again, the communication should be coming from the superintendent, probably and possibly in conjunction with the board chair, right? And again, I'll just share that we know parents get frustrated when they don't have all the details. But again, with the school safety, security and safety plans and the information around the threats, you know, the Connecticut Intelligence Center is continuing to collect information about all of those threats to see if there are commonalities among them. So again, in the communication that's going to go out today, we just reassure parents that folks are on it. There are teams and committees who are working on this, but the specific information about the threats and sometimes the specific information about the school security and safety plans can't be shared for fear that it fall into the wrong hands. Right, that information is for first responders so that they can ensure the safety of the school community.
Okay. So our next question is, there's a couple steps to this question. So what resources are available for boards that may be interested in adding additional security staff, specifically additional information on the following? So laws related to SROs and ASOs qualifications and training requirements, supervisory requirements for SROs and ASOs, and support for managing ASOs at the state level.
I don't know that, well, I'll take a stab. There is actually a national organization for school resource officers. I'm forgetting the name of it at the moment, but they've got some great information and resources regarding qualifications and training and the like. So that's certainly one resource I would refer folks to.
And we know that anyone who's serving as an armed security guard in a school district, whether they're serving as an SRO or an armed security guard, must have gone through the police training, not the academy necessarily, but the post training to be able to be an armed guard in schools. We know most of our SROs are retired police officers, so they obviously apply, but I know some folks have used some resources to provide armed guards. So that I know is a very specific requirement.
The other thing that I would add is by statute, we must have a memorandum of understanding between the police department and the school district. And you can remind folks of that. It should be posted on your website, an available resource, and that certainly provides information about the relationship between the police department and the school district.
Can I just weigh in real quick on, it's related to that question. So we're actually working now with our partners in DESP to put together a research on training for not school resource officers, but some of the unarmed and the armed security officers. So we have a research study that's in its early phases right now. So it will be coming out probably in the next month or 2 months. So I would hopefully, once we get that out, we would encourage anyone from the Board of Education, if you could share that with your school districts. We would love to collect data to find out what are some of the best trainings we could put together here for unarmed security officers in K-12 school, as well as armed school officers, armed school security officers in the K-12 schools.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you all feel about a potential change in crisis drills proposed? Just one for students and one only for staff.
I would just say there have been a number of pieces of legislation that have come up over the last couple of years. And it's a great question because it's a great debate, right? When we think about fire drills and school crisis drills, we know that repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity lends itself to safety. The flip side of that is that we don't want to unnecessarily frighten students and staff. The third thing I'll say is it's important that students participate in those drills, because if we have a staff only drill, maybe a staff only drill, to sort of set up the drill that includes all the students, but a school building is entirely different when you've got staff and kids trying to either evacuate the building or shelter in place versus just the adults in the building.
So I'd like to build on that, and then I think Bill Turley may have some information he wants to provide as well. But we are working on a study of the crisis response drills per statute that has asked us to do that. We're aware of situations across the country where, I'm thinking it was in Nashville in particular, where the school that was threatened had just done a drill, and so the kids and the teachers knew what to do. I think it's how it's presented. I don't think we need tactical drills where, law enforcement is coming in while the kids are there and the teachers are there responding. Those can be done on a weekend without the actual students or the teachers in the building. But the exercise of practicing, the opposite of a fire drill, basically, I think is an important thing. One of the recommendations that we're considering is to suggest that schools think about either providing information to the parents before the day of an exercise about what's going to take place, or even maybe having a run through of the exercise that parents can participate in so that they're aware of it. I think a lot of it from the student perspective has to do with the perception of how it's affecting the adults around them. And so the more that we can give a comfort level to teachers and staff and parents that this is, I'm old enough to remember when we all thought the world was going to end at noon, and the kids weren't really all that. We just thought it was kind of cool. But if teachers are upset about it or parents are upset about it, then it's different. So I think it has a lot to do with educating others to realize this is a reality, but it doesn't have to be stressful. It just has to, as John said, it just has to give them the practice that they need in case, God forbid, they actually need it. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Bill Turley because he's the one that's been putting together a lot of resources.
Yes, thank you, DC. There is also a work group that's been established. Amory is on it, along with Kim Zigich, our attorney. The work group is looking at this, crisis drills in the state, and recommendations. One of the things I would like to say is in Connecticut, you're required to do 3 crisis drills, but we don't say what those drills have to be. It could be an evacuation, it can be a lockdown, it can be a shelter in place, it can be a secure school. So we do not specify that you have to do active shooter drills. It's just that you have to do crisis drills. A lockdown drill can be considered an active shooter drill. But as the DC said, we do not advocate police officers running through the school with weapons, whether they be simunition or not. That's just not what we'd like to see. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so our next question is, vague reassurances are no longer sufficient to calm community anxieties. Social media moves as fast in the parent circle as it does in the student circles. It would be helpful to know what degree of non-personally identifiable specificity we can provide.
If it's regarding a student, the short answer is none.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because of FERPA.
Thank you. So moving on to our next question, are there materials that districts could give to parents advising on best ways to discuss the issues of school threats and real shootings kids see happening in the news? Parents seem at a loss. They don't want to scare the kids, but also need to know how to be honest and address their kids' concerns.
I can take a hop at that. So there's great resources from the National Association for School Psychologists on speaking to children, especially about violence and things in the media. So what I'll do is I'll send you a link in a minute, but there's other organizations as well. We just are trained through the PREPARE model through the National Association for School Psychologists for the whole recovery part of this. So they have some good resources, and it's directed directly to parents and caregivers talking to their children about this. So I'll put it in the chat and send it to you.
Thank you. So our next question is, police departments are reluctant to charge students. They claim prosecutors are reluctant to take up charges. How do we push or encourage to skip JRB and do an arrest?
So Lieutenant Bryce kind of works with a JRB actively right now, so maybe he can shed a little bit of light on it.
Yeah, so the JRB process, generally speaking, is agency directed. So there is no requirement for a JRB. Like at my agency, we have a system set up where a kid can go through a JRB process one time. I think we've upped it to 2 times now. But it's really an issue with the juvenile courts because as we've sent cases in, if it's, let's say, the typical one of a kid who, says, oh, I got this teacher for school, I'm going to shoot up the place tomorrow, and it's deemed as to be a non-credible threat. We've seen it where the juvenile court will say, okay, this kid wasn't really making a true threat. They were just, speaking without thinking, and put them through the JRB process in order for them to do either a project or some kind of community service and make them have an understanding of their actions. In talking with one of the juvenile prosecutors just last week, he said majority of these ones that are causing mass havoc, they are encouraging officers to do juvenile referrals. So they are going down to juvenile court and they're putting them on suspended orders of detention. And in some cases where the threats were either considered to be potentially real and or again creating a significant amount of havoc, they're also doing detention orders, and they've sought detention orders on kids who are out of state as well.
And I think the shortest answer on this too is that each geographic area, wherever you are located, there's a bunch of different court systems, and they're all going to handle them differently. But they're going to kind of go by these same guidelines that's there. I don't know that we have a real push on it, other than to hope that your relationships have something. And I don't know if Amory has any insight into that at all or not.
Now you're covering the key points. There are a lot of differences depending where you are in the state. We've seen different responses. So the biggest thing when it comes to threats and students, we're looking for what's the intention, and then we also have to take into account the consequences that it had, but we still focus heavily on what was that student's intentions, what's the mindset that student was in. A lot of these are sometimes cries for help. Sometimes there's a lot of trauma going on in that person's life, so a lot of intervention. So a lot of times we're focused more on preventing the threat, and then again, there's differences in the school communities we worked with. Some are more geared towards getting those interventions in place. Other ones are much more punitive. So there's a range, and we're not here to make that decision for those local areas. We're more to give them as much information as possible, but we're huge on the prevention. Get those risk factors down so we can avoid that before it even gets to that level.
Thank you. So our next question is, what kind of progress is being made on the cell phone ban that Governor Lamont introduced this summer? And unavailability of phones would help to cap the number of in-school disruptions being experienced.
Yeah, so just a couple of clarifications. One, it's the governor and the State Board of Education did not mandate a ban in schools. The recommendation was that districts look at their policies around cell phone use by different grade bands. When do they have access to cell phones in elementary, middle, and high? And those are in the process of being put in place. We're actually going to be doing a survey in the next month or so to find out exactly what those policies are. But we do know that removing cell phones from students' hands during the school day eliminates quite a few disruptions. Like students are no longer able to text each other and tell each other where the fight was happening in the school building. They're no longer able to sort of cyberbully themselves to others during the school day and things like that. So we are seeing a reduction in office referrals, a reduction in school discipline as a result of that as well. So that in and of itself, students don't have access to their cell phones. They obviously couldn't call in or text in a threat. But the flip side of that is all of the school districts for every school has a portion of their school security and safety plan to address how to get in touch with law enforcement, how to report a threat, how to report an issue in the school for emergency purposes, whether that's phones in the classroom, whether that's instructor or administrator access to cell phones. Some districts have wearable panic buttons, some have in classroom panic buttons. So there are ways to notify law enforcement and notify the school administrative team if there is a threat. And so those are in place as well as part of their cell phone policy, and also as part of their school security and safety plan, and also part of their safe school climate policy as well.
And I can add from the CABE policy perspective, very high level, that our policy department is working with school districts and them developing their cell phone policies and encouraging school boards to include the community, the parents in this process. So, and students in this process of developing and revising policies regarding cell phone use in the schools. That is something that, as John was talking about, is moving forward and many school districts are working on.
And if I could just add one more piece to that question as well. Like anything that we say, take it with a grain of salt. There's always extremes to either side of the other. But I would say that from our point of view, a vast majority of the threats that we see coming, they're not necessarily coming in during the school day. They're coming in at the end of the school day after it's over. They're coming in overnight. They're coming in before the school starts. So, although it's important to try to have some control over what's happening in the school day, understand that the impact on this won't necessarily have the impact on these threats in the general sense that we're hoping for.
Yeah. And just something else I'd like to add to Jody Goller, who is our Senior Staff Associate for Policy Services too, is encouraging school boards when a parent says, my child needs a phone, because what if something happens in the school and they need to know, that he's recommending that this be brought to the school's safety committee, the district safety committee, and even the local law enforcement officials. Like, do you want parents showing up? Do you want all these kids calling their parents? And often, always, the case is no, we don't want this because it's going to interfere with the response of those who are going to keep our children safest. So there is that way to also put that where it needs to be. Is it part of your school safety plan?
Can I add one thing to that? I'm sorry. The
Absolutely.
University of Connecticut is actually working on research. I don't have all the details in front of me, but they are looking to research this topic. So there was some great data came out in the book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. So he had put together a great argument towards why the cell phone use for youth is so damaging. And then I know UConn just took on this project. So I believe there's going to be more data coming out, and it'll be specific to Connecticut. So more to come on this.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question, first they start with, this was very helpful. What are additional best practices that the school could take to ensure that students understand how and when to report a potential threat? They love the app idea, but their question is more about helping the student understand their potential role without fear.
One of the things that we always say first and foremost is for students to have an adult in their school building that they can trust. It doesn't have to be their teacher, it doesn't have to be the principal, it can be the SRO, it can be custodial services, it can be the school nurse, it can be anyone. As long as there's someone in the building that student feels like, hey, if there's something going on, whatever it is, I can check in with them. I think that's the first thing to do, is to build those relationships so students have someone. That's what schools can do to make sure that every student has someone they can talk to. And then students should, in the student code of conduct, obviously in all of the plans that I mentioned, there should be opportunities and ways in which students can think about what they're hearing in the hallways, think about what they're hearing from their peers, and have a specific place where they can report.
Thank you. Next question is, do state statutes on discipline allow us to do out-of-school suspension or expulsion for threats determined non-viable?
Okay, so the suspension laws are numerous. And so what I would say is there are, depending on the age group, right? If you're talking about, so let's assume that we're not talking about K through 2. They're specific to that. So if we're talking about grades 3 through 12, an out-of-school suspension, what the law says is an in-school suspension has to be provided in lieu of an out-of-school suspension unless the activity has caused a serious disruption of the educational process, which a threat may or may not result in that, or if the behavior of the student is such that the school has attempted other ways to control or support the student behaving in a more proper manner, then an out-of-school suspension can be imposed as well. I can share with you, we have what we call family guides for school discipline, both for suspension and expulsion. And I can share those with you, Lisa, to share with your members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last question that I have here is there data recorded on the students that make these threats? For example, race, age range, socioeconomic background, special education students, mental health issues, or chronic absenteeism? They're just curious about that.
Can you repeat that?
So they're looking to see if there is any data recorded on the students that make the threats. Like, for example, their race, their age range, socioeconomic background, and mental health issues.
Well, certainly maybe Floyd can answer this as well. But is there data maintained? If there was an action, taken against a student, like a suspension or expulsion or something, that is certainly in the student's file. However, that data is covered under FERPA and would not be able to be shared with anyone outside of that student or that student's family. However, if a student feels that they are being targeted because of a protected class, religion, gender, those kinds of things, then race, ethnicity, all of those things, then that should be brought to the attention of the administration, because that's a whole nother level of harassment that have federal and state laws that protect those students.
Yeah, I would, I'm not aware of any specific research or studies, and I agree with John's points. It's possible. I mean, the FBI keeps a lot of good data and statistics. They may have some. I'm not sure what the point of it would be, other than idle curiosity. I don't think we're going to start profiling any particular type of kid, but it's possible the FBI may have something, but I don't know.
So Lisa, I don't have any other questions here, and we are 1 minute past our scheduled time.
Okay. Well, given that there are no additional questions, I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for sharing so much information in a short period of time. And it's really important information. It's unfortunate that we have to have these conversations, but I am so thrilled to know that there is a group of people such as yourselves all working together as we face these issues. So thank you to each one of you for taking the time today to be with us, and to all who participated, thank you. And as I often say, thank you for taking your professional development seriously. It's very important. You expect it of your staff, and you should expect it of yourself and your fellow board members. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody, and go enjoy this lovely autumn afternoon. Thank you.
So long, folks.